thank you for coming. My name is Lucy Long. I direct an independent nonprofit, the Center for Food and Culture. It's based here in Bowling Green, but we actually have an international scope. And we produce materials, educational materials about food and culture. So the program today and everything that's happening out here is part of that mission. I should also mention I've written a lot of books. Nothing about foraging, so it's not really my expertise. But I've written a lot on food history, ethnic food in the U.S., regional American foods, culinary tourism, things like that. So if anyone's interested in asking me about food studies as a career path or as a field of study, feel free to. So let me give you a little bit of background on this event, because this explains a little bit of what's going on today. I've always done a lot of work. I'm retired faculty from Bowling Green State University, and I've taught at some other universities also. And I've always done a lot of work with museums. So when I was retired, I thought, great, now I can finally get to do what I really love, which is work with museums. So, and work with the general public. So the difference between looking out at a crowd like this and looking out at a crowd of students, is very, very different. So I came out and I talked to Corinne, because I've done some other programs here, mostly food related, although I also specialize in music and dance. So we've done things like, traditional candy making, taffy pulling, popcorn balls, that type of thing, just to kind of help people give people a sense of what life, not just what it was like, but what it feels like. Because when you eat the food and you prepare the food, you start seeing that, oh yeah, this is what it was really like back then. It was a lot harder. And we can romanticize the past in many ways, but then when you're actually living the past, which is part of what this museum is trying to do, you don't romanticize it. You start seeing why things were difficult, why people made the choices they did to make changes and for progress. Okay, so that's a very important idea that we'll actually be talking about at 3 o'clock. When I start talking about green bean casserole, which is kind of the other extreme from what we're talking about now. So I started talking to Corinne about doing some more food-related programs. And one of the things that was an issue for farms, and not just farmers, but for most people who were living in pre-industrial or outside of urban areas in the U.S., there would be lean times of the year, when they were finishing up all the preserved foods in the pantry, and the new crops had not yet come in. Okay, and that differed in different times of the year. Usually about April, and in this area, April and May, it started being kind of lean, and so people were starting to go out and see what they could find to supplement, and it wasn't just nutritional supplements. They hadn't had fresh food in 6 months. So they also knew that a lot of those wild foods had medicinal properties and could help them, with congestion and things that they had gotten, during the cold winter. Things that would cleanse the blood and cleanse the body. So we actually have an expert here who's going to be talking much more about specific plants and what they can do and what they cannot do. So I'm not the expert on that. But
I wouldn't go like this with your expertise, though.
Well, I'm an expert enough to know that you have to be extremely cautious, and that foods from the wild, they can harm, they can kill, as well as be very, very beneficial. So you do have to be very cautious. So, and that is something that we really do want to emphasize. So when I talked to Corinne about doing this program, I thought, well, this fits in perfectly with the theme of Carter Farms. And this particular region, the Great Black Swamp, is an incredible resource. So, but it wasn't always. It was also a very difficult place to live. And nature gave incredible abundance, but it could also turn on you and it could kill you. So tornadoes could come through and wipe out all your work. It could rain and the swamp returns. So there's this abundance, but also danger. Okay, so we wanted to look at that and do a program about eating from the wild. And then WBGU-TV contacted me because they're doing this project on the Great American Recipe. But let's get these two combined. So it turned into a much larger event. Okay, and so that's kind of the origins of this particular event. Okay, so and I will be talking about green bean casserole later on, which tends to be a family tradition in this area and really reflects and represents the whole history of nature, being difficult, and industrial agriculture in the area, but also how everyone personalizes the stuff. Okay, so let's go back now though to eating from nature. Okay, and today most of us tend to think of eating from nature as an option, or a recreation. We get to go out in the woods. I've gone on foraging trips with Tammy. It's wonderful. So with some other people here. And part of it is just being out in nature. There's all sorts of science now proving that being in nature is helpful for us emotionally and physically, psychologically. So just being out in nature is recreation, something to do that can be fun. It can be very social. You're gathering together with people. So there are all these benefits to eating from the wild when you go out foraging. But then there are these other sort of intangible benefits. That you start recognizing we live in these seasons. And we might really like morel mushrooms, but there only are certain seasons that we can go out looking for them. We can look for them the rest of the year,
Yes.
but it's not going to be very successful. And that ties us in with the sense of the seasons. Okay, it also ties us in with the sense of, nature changes things, the weather changes. Things can be doing, all the trees are budding, and then all of a sudden there's a cold snap. And it makes us so much more aware of these changes in nature, and makes us aware that life is actually pretty precarious. And even though we live in this very modern way that separates us from nature and usually protects us from it, we're not fully protected. And whether or not it's good to recognize that or not, I personally think it is. But people kind of argue about that. So, there are all these benefits that are intangible from eating foods from the wild. But also, there are still many people today who eat food from the wild for economic reasons. It's so much cheaper to go out and pick service berries, which are all over town right now, and nobody seems to know that they're edible. So it's so much cheaper to do that than to go down to the farmer's market, and pay $6 for a pint of strawberries. So, which you should still go to the farmer's market and do that. So there's some good economic reasons for going foraging. Okay, people who are farmers, they frequently have to deal with critters, that are eating their crops in the gardens. So sometimes hunting and trapping is necessary. and then eating those animals is, we can see that as an environmentally conscientious thing to do. You're making use of nature. And some people do need to feed their families in that way. So there, I was checking to see if there are any other practical reasons, for going foraging. One of the things that happens too is that people who hunt and fish and forage, they're very aware of the need to protect the environment, okay, which does seem sometimes like an oxymoron with hunting, but it's frequently people who are foraging, who are depending on the wild, they're the ones who recognize that the land needs to be protected. And so frequently there is a real attempt to protect the environment from the people who are foraging. Unfortunately, foraging and foods from the wild are currently extremely trendy, and a number of restaurants, urban restaurants, are now serving foraged foods, charging exorbitant amounts. In the past, foraging was sometimes kind of a part-time occupation for rural people. I come from the southern Appalachian Mountain region, and a lot of people down there would forage for ginseng and things like that, and ramps. And now, okay, these are ramps actually from Northwest Ohio. Okay, these are actually from Paul Hagen's woods. So, Paul. So they're very odoriferous. So I'm gonna pass this around just so you can smell them. I've had them frozen, so you can see them. Okay, now there's a restaurant in Asheville, North Carolina, that serves a plate that charges a plate of pickled ramps. They charge $20 a plate. So there's $40 in here. But you can imagine what that is doing. It's encouraging people to do the foraging just for money. Not that my cousins were not just doing it for money, but people are coming in, they don't know the environment, and they don't know the need for protection. They're not really all that concerned with it. So when we talk about foraging, we also talk about it very cautiously. People need to be very respectful of the land, of nature, of the need to take only what they need. Not take things during the wrong season. Plus, it can kill you if you do. So I'm going to pass these around. Okay, ramps are also really interesting because for a long time they were associated with West Virginia, and they were thought of as an Appalachian kind of plant. Okay, there's a big ramp festival in West Virginia. Okay, everybody knows all the stereotypes of hillbillies, and so this festival, is supposed to be like ramps and moonshine, and hee-haw. So they were playing up that whole image. Well, recently, because ramps have gotten to be fairly popular, people are realizing, well, wait a minute, this is up in Northwest Ohio, and we have ramps. You can get ramps in Maine, you can get them in Minnesota, you can find them. So people are starting to look for them, and all of a sudden, West Virginia is saying, wait a minute, this is supposed to be our plant. So, but it's also kind of relieving the pressure of, there were so many people going into the mountains, and the National Forest and the State Forest all have signs up, please do not forage in here. And there are numerous plants. Galax was something that the Appalachian people would go and hunt and sell to florists, all over the country. They had to stop doing that. In the 1960s, they started putting all these restrictions on. So just because things were being ruined, so now West Virginia said, well, you can still get the best ramps in West Virginia, but you don't have to go only there. You don't have to forage only there. Okay, so now part of what is so interesting about foods from the wild, particularly in Northwest Ohio. It really ties us in with pioneer heritage and the Native American history. Okay, most of you are familiar with kind of the romanticization of Native Americans. That they lived very close to the land and all. Well, that was true. Most of the tribes did have a philosophy of working with nature. They knew they had to live with nature. So they would forage, but they knew how to do it so that it would not destroy the next year's crop, okay? Or take away the roots of plants. Okay, so they had learned how to use nature for what they needed, but to use it, what we would now say, sustainably. So they knew how to use it so that it could endure into the future, so that we would still have it to use it. Okay, and a good example of that, we tend to think of Native Americans, on horseback chasing buffalo and things. They also cultivated crops, and apparently there were buffalo in this area.
Yes, there were.
So yeah, but it was very swampy in here, so you didn't always get buffalo right in the Great Black Swamp area. But one of the things that they would do is plant the three sisters, which is corn, beans, and squash. And they would plant them together in mounds wherever there was sunlight coming in between the trees. Okay, so rather than nice fields that are plowed in these straight lines, and it's obvious that humans are here, instead it was like, oh, here's a patch of sunlight, it's not gonna hurt anything. We'll put the three sisters here. Okay, and so they had been doing this for years. This is probably a practice that came up from Central America, from Native Americans there. And so when European settlers came in, Europeans were used to looking at nature as, this is something that we have to tame and dominate, because nature can be kind of dangerous, So, and they meant that spiritually as well as physically. So the concept of farming for the European settlers was, we have to cut down all the trees. We have to make these bare fields so that we can have these straight lines and everything can grow in a uniform way. Okay, and so part of what happened, people like Thomas Jefferson looked out, at these little mounds and said, oh, that's not farming. That's just kind of survivalist stuff, These people don't really know how to cultivate the land. And that was actually used as an excuse to take away the land. Okay, that happened in Northwest Ohio. Also, in the 1830s, the Indian Removal Act meant that all Native Americans had to move out. Okay, now, the Great Black Swamp area, most Native Americans were smart enough not to live in a swamp. So they would live along the ridges, like over by the Maumee River. They would use this area for hunting grounds and for foraging. Okay, and European trappers and hunters would come in. They learned a lot of the skills from the Native Americans. Okay, and then European farmers started coming in. They frequently, the wagon wheels would get bogged down in the mud, and then they were stuck, and that's where they settled. so not the nicest origin myth for how towns started. It's like, this is where the big mud pit was. So, but the skills, the knowledge that Native Americans had of food from the wild was passed down through those hunters and trappers, and then some of the early settlers, who also recognized that we don't really know how to deal with this, and there were some very productive interchanges for the settlers, we'll say. There were, partly because it was a swamp area, And it didn't start being drained until the 1830s, so it could not be turned into farmland. There were a number of Native American families who actually stayed in the area, and they were able to assimilate with, either assimilate with white families or hide out from them, so that there are at least two families that I have heard of who have had continued habitation in this area. Unfortunately, most of them had to hide their Native American identity. They could keep their skills and knowledge, though. And so the various pioneers and settlers coming in would learn these things, okay, if they were willing. Okay, frequently they saw this as, this is savage stuff. This is a savage land. We don't want to be taking savage stuff into our bodies, and we want to be as civilized as possible. So they tried to get away from the natural foods, from foods from nature as much as possible. And part of that also is that if you're raising your own food, in theory you can guarantee how much you have and what the quality is. Because with wild foods, you never quite know if things are going to taste good or not. Okay, so kind of along those lines, I want to show you some of the things that I personally have collected. So, okay, just a few of the things that are available in the area, and Tammy's going to go into this a lot more. We tend to walk past food constantly. So in the spring, how before you have mowed your lawn, violets. And so I tried drying these. They're tasteless dried. However, a lot of people do use them for tea and make them into syrups. Okay, and I did try crystallizing some, making them sugar. I'm going to pass these around. Feel free to take one if you want.
Not edible, too.
They are edible, yeah, and the stems and the leaves are edible also. One of the things that is native to this area is redbud trees. Okay, they frequently are seen as a pest tree, but they're beautiful in the spring. I have them growing all over my yard. If anyone needs one, let me know. You can come and dig it up. So, but I had no idea. These beautiful purple flowers are very, very high in vitamin C, and they're sweet. They're really tasty. So I was able to actually save this from my yard, and I tried drying a bunch. So they don't taste good, but I think they're going to be good for tea.
You make tea out of it. Can we try one?
Yes, yeah. You can try it. It just tastes like cardboard, But yeah, a lot of people just save these and make tea. It's so and pardon. Yes, service berries. So I'm going to pass these around. Feel free to take one, or go to Grounds for Thought in Bowling Green, and right behind Grounds for Thought, I think you posted about this too. And so, they have tons of berries on that tree. So they're called. What's the actual name?
Almenchior, Almenchior.
Oh, that's...
Elementior. Okay.
It's close enough. I mean, I don't know if I have the accent of the right syllable, but that's
Okay.
that's botanical.
Well, and then frequently they're referred to in this area as service berries, and the nicknames that are given to plants frequently refer to their function and some of their properties. So the story that I heard, these are called service berries because they're one of the first berries that ripens in the spring. And so people would be waiting all winter long to hold funerals for people who had died. And then, they weren't able to hold the funerals until the spring thaw. So with the service berries, they were finally able to make pies. Because apparently in this area, you cannot have a funeral if you don't have pies. So the service berries are coming from that. Okay, one of the other things, okay, that is also a pest and is not native to the area are mustard garlic. I did try drying some. So, and then we're going to be making pesto with the frozen garlic mustard. So it's very good to pull this up out of your yard, but you can also use it. You can use it like spinach or green. So and several people helped me. I think you were there. You helped me pull the leaves off. So there is a demonstration of garlic mustard pesto later, and the recipe is on the handout also. So the last thing is nuts, okay? And tree nuts are a really good example of why people shifted over from food from the wild to food from the supermarket. Okay, butternuts. Okay, I'm going to pass this around just so you can see them and feel them. Okay, and hickory. Okay, and all of these are from Paul Hagen, who's a local expert on this type of thing. So, and he actually toasted or roasted some black walnuts. So feel free to take one of those and taste it. Okay, now, and it has a much more intense flavor, than the store-bought English walnuts. Okay, however, and I remember collecting walnuts as a kid in North Carolina, up here, and then desperately trying to crack them. Well, and we would leave them in, we'd gather them, we'd leave them in burlap bags, and then we'd drive over them to crush them. So Paul gave me, or is lending, a nutcracker.
They'll stain your hands.
I know, yes, and they stain your hands. And all of this stuff has multiple uses, can be used for dyeing cloth and So, okay, does anyone know how this works? So it's, there you go. And that's, yeah, so, and then even then, I remember sitting out on the porch picking the walnut meat out. Yes. So, it's something, you can turn on Netflix and sit there and do it now. But it used to be you'd sit there and people would tell stories. So, thank you.